All right, welcome everybody to the Rural Electric Cooperative Co-lab. My name is Tom Llewellyn. I'm the Executive Director at Shareable. We are a working partner of the Rural Power Coalition that is hosting this educational series. This is the 8th and final session of our 2-month collab. We may be doing some other bonus things later in the summer, but we're going to be cutting it off after today. I want to thank everybody who joined us for multiple sessions and also welcome anybody who's coming in just for this one today. If you have any issues at all during the Zoom, you can look for the three of us that have lightning bolts before our names. We are part of the Shareable team that's doing the hosting. Send us a direct message and we will try to take care of you. This session is being recorded. We will be producing a human-edited transcript of the session, plus the slide deck and the video as well will be available and posted to Canvas, which is our kind of community space where we're keeping all of the recordings from previous sessions as well. Aaron's going to go ahead and drop a link into Canvas now. You can register there and you can access, again, like I said, all the recordings from the 8 sessions of this collab. Today's session is going to be a little bit different than previous ones. Rather than a series of presentations, we're going to have a short presentation from Erik, and then he's going to be hosting a panel discussion for the rest of the session. Today, we're going to be talking about community benefits plans. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Erik to take away for the rest of the session.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Tom. And thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. As Tom said, my name is Erik Hatlestad. I'm the Director of Rural Cooperative Energy at CURE. We are a rural grassroots organization based in Minnesota. And I should also mention that last year I was an advisor on community benefits to the Rural Utility Service in the Biden administration. Joining me today is Vonda McDaniel. Vonda has been the president of the Central Labor Council of Nashville and Middle Tennessee for more than 10 years. The CLC was a key partner in winning the first community benefit agreement in Tennessee for the MLS soccer stadium in Nashville in 2018. Vonda was also instrumental in starting an apprenticeship readiness program in Nashville called Music City Construction Careers, which creates pathways to union jobs in the building and construction trades. Vonda served on the Tennessee State Workforce Investment Board and as a vice president for the AFL-CIO's Executive Council and as a former co-chair of the State Federation Central Labor Council Advisory Committee. Prior to these endeavors, Vonda worked with the United Rubber Workers and was a shop steward. Thank you for being here, Vonda. And also, we're joined by Tara Greiman. Tara is the Wisconsin Farmers Union Director of Conservation and Stewardship. In this role, she connects the many conservation-focused projects of the Wisconsin Farmers Union to help promote win-win scenarios that benefit farmers and the ecological communities around them. This includes working in water protection, soil health management, renewable energy system work, and uplifting how responsible farmers are protecting their communities and environment. For the past year and a half, Tara has been working with state partners, rural town boards, and local Wisconsin Farmers Union chapters to promote the policy created by Farmers Union members to promote responsible renewable energy transition that enhances rather than extracts from rural communities. Thank you for joining us today, Tara. So just wanted to introduce our panelists here at the beginning of the session. And now I'm going to be heading into just a quick brief on what community benefit plans are, in case you're not so familiar with them. So community benefit plans are non-binding agreements made between a community and a developer that outlines a broad plan for engagement of a community around a specific project. They identify the community's priorities and the developer's commitment to meet those priorities. Community benefit plans are, a growing and emerging concept, particularly for those of us focused on energy development, but they've been around for decades and have been used by project developers to help build community support for a project, to help address community concerns, and avoid project delays. They've kind of were oftentimes originally used in major urban redevelopment projects, particularly around stadiums, as Vonda can tell us, and have really been used in large projects on a growing basis over the last couple of decades. They often result in a legally binding agreement, such as a community benefit agreement. Could I have the next slide? So community benefit plans are important for project developers to consider and for communities, farmers, and workers to advocate for. It allows impacted communities and host communities, workers and farmers to maximize the benefit from a proposed project, going beyond the general property tax revenue or general course of job creation that would come through the standard development of a project. Community benefit plans and any agreements resulting from them can also help reduce risks to project siting. They can help build community support and overall success of the project. And we know they're important because we have, particularly for energy development, because we have 30 years of research looking at what specifically drives community support for solar and wind siting. And it comes down to two things. They're highly visible investments in the community, and then perception that the community engagement process was fair. So those two things are, really important to the success of a clean energy siting project or clean energy siting, but it's also really important because we want communities, we want workers, we want farmers to have their priorities and concerns met through project development. We want projects to be done with communities rather than to communities. Next slide, please. They're also important because they're extremely popular. Over 3/4 of voters across the country support the use of community benefit agreements on developments. Next slide. So a lot of times people, because community benefit plans and community benefit agreements are a emerging concept, people ask, what's a potential component of them? And the answer to that is, well, it depends on the community, it depends on the project, and depends on what the developer will agree to. So that's why the engagement process is so important, because we want to make sure that those priorities and concerns are actively heard and a developer is responding to those concerns and priorities. So in some communities, they maybe want to see a focus on support to their local community college or scholarships to their high school. In other communities, they might have a priority on minimums on hiring local workers. Or in other communities, it could be one-time payments to different economic development projects that a community has. Things like a childcare facility or a local meat processing facility, or so many other things. So there are, of course, there are examples of successful community benefit plans and community benefit agreements that we can look to for inspiration. There are unfortunately not as many of them publicly available as I would like for there to be. But we can certainly look towards previous examples for inspiration, but it really depends on the engagement that should happen around a community benefit plan. Next slide. So this is what I think is a really great example of a community benefit plan in Massachusetts. This was a $9 million in funding assistance to the host community that covered a wide kind of number of community priorities. We had regular payments to the public schools to support bilingual outreach. It had, local hiring goals, equity hiring goals for union workers, um, support for expansion of childcare. So there's a lot of stuff here. So just as a really great example of kind of the broad scope of things that could be included in a community benefit plan or community benefit agreement, I think this is a pretty good one. Next slide, please. Another one that I think is a really great one, is a particularly rural example, is in Patriot County, Michigan. So this is a county that has taken on a countywide framework around community benefits. So they have set expectations that are a part of their permitting process. And you can see the priorities here. They're really focused on maintaining the agricultural economy in that area, and expanding more opportunities for local farmers, and growing the local foods system in that area. Next slide. Now, I should say, there are a growing number of barriers to accomplishing community benefits. So right now, there are not a lot of requirements for a developer to negotiate with communities. Up until the change of administration, the Department of Energy had a community benefit plans as a part of their programs. So did the Environmental Protection Agency. But as we've seen over the last couple of months, where a lot of those the community benefits components of those programs have been eliminated. So we're seeing fewer and fewer, kind of legal requirements for community benefit plans to be accomplished with at least federally funded projects. I will say that the final community benefit plan framework that still exists in the federal government is at the USDA, which is surprising and exciting. But again, entering into negotiation with community stakeholder groups or an impacted community, in most communities, unless there is, it's a part of a permitting or a local permitting process, or there's some other kind of local ordinance or framework to require them to do it. Entering into negotiation with community groups is voluntary. And community stakeholders often lack leverage to bring developers to the table to negotiate. And of course, as community benefits are a still emerging concept for many people, especially in rural America, many local governments, community groups, and other stakeholders are just not familiar with community benefit plans. Could I get the next slide, please? All right. So that is my quick rundown of community benefit plans, community benefit agreements, some examples and barriers to getting there. Obviously, 15 minutes is not enough to do that justice, but we're really here to hear from our great panelists here. So let's take the slides down and welcome Vonda and Tara. Well, first of all, I should just give you both the opportunity to just say hello and introduce yourself, or add any introductory statement you'd like to say that I may have missed in my opening introduction. Vonda, would you like to go first?
Oh, sure. So first I want to say thank you to Bree Nicely for connecting me with you, Erik, and Aaron. I have been doing work as a part of the labor movement for more than 34 years. These community benefits agreements have definitely been a tool to help to not only support the work of labor, but also our whole community when these big developments happen, so that development happens with us and not to us. And so I'm just excited to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you so much. And Tara, take it away.
I would just echo the same thing here in Wisconsin. It's very tricky to have the conversations around some of the larger renewable energy utility scale projects. Big change makes big feelings kind of across the board in our communities. And so this is a really exciting avenue, although I would say we are much further back in this avenue than you are, Vonda, in what we're talking about. But this is the way I think we can move forward to see how we can engage. And it just feels like a really good avenue. So I am excited to chat today as well.
Thank you so much, Tara. Vonda, we know that you're really experienced in the labor movement and in community benefits work. Could you tell us a little bit about how community benefits, in your experience, have supported workers and what maybe some best practices are for labor benefits in a community benefit plan?
Sure. So, for more than 20 years, you mentioned that these community benefits agreements have been around for a while. I was first exposed to them with the LAX airport, where our friends and colleagues in California were able to get local hire and significant other benefits as a result of the community coming together, having lots of community meetings in order to make sure that needs of the development aligned with what the needs of the community were. And in other places, Pittsburgh. So in Nashville, we saw an opportunity with a development with the Nashville soccer stadium. The leverage in this piece was that they needed 10 acres of city-owned property in order to make the deal work. And that property had to be approved by our city council. So that gave the ecosystem community partners that range from local neighborhood associations in the area where the soccer stadium was going to be built, the trades that were actually interested in building the soccer stadium, the faith communities in that area, and even parents, because part of what we all hope for our children is that they have the opportunities that are highlighted in these super venues for professional sports. So our coalition came together over the course of about a year, having these periodic meetings around like what the neighborhood wanted to see. And ultimately, the community was able to negotiate with Nashville Soccer Holdings affordable housing that looked like about 25% of the units that were built around the development of the soccer stadium, 20% of the 20% that were the 60% of the area's AMI, which, we are about 30,000 units of affordable housing short. So everything that we can negotiate and all of the development that's happening is needed. Living wages, post-construction, the jobs that are needed to operate the facility. There was a base of $15.50, which ultimately went to $18 and I think 40 cents. In order for the workers, the folks that take tickets, the stadium workers, the community amenities. Nashville is an art city, and so having spaces for artists to be able to kind of workshop their work and sell their wares. Childcare was a need that was negotiated, and um, responsible bidding language for the contractors that were going to be working on the project. So it wasn't just about unions and what we want in terms of jobs, bill, but it really was a project that ultimately expanded the economic investment that the soccer stadium folks, invested in our city.
Well, I was lucky enough to go to a game in this stadium a couple of years ago, so y'all did great work. But I really appreciate you raising that point around how you were working in coalition to make this robust community benefit agreement happen. In the work that we're involved with in Minnesota, that has been a really big part of a part of our work is building coalition with farm groups and with labor and with other community groups. And I really think that is something that is so important for not just accomplishing a really great community benefit plan for any given project, but helping build a coalition of organizations that can really stick together in the long term and continue to build community benefit plans for other projects and other community engagement. So I'm really excited about that. Tara, so when you're looking at community benefits plans and support for farmers, what are you seeing as some priorities for you in Wisconsin with your members?
Yeah, so the biggest thing that we see when we see pushback to the renewable energy projects, specifically wind and solar, we see the community saying, well, it's like they were trying to sneak in, right? This standard process seems to be that they go to some of the largest landowners first and they try to get agreements with those, and then they kind of just notify the rest of the community that the project is happening. And it's that lack of control that can kind of set some communities alight with a lot of issues. And so some of the best practices that we are trying to encourage our developers and our utilities to consider is early and often engagement, but also true engagement. So we're having more discussions about how education and pamphlets and informational sessions aren't really engagement. That's very one directional. Engagement to us looks bi-directional. So there should be opportunities for the community to provide feedback. And they're good at doing that with the landowners that they might lease from, but they're because of the level of control, the landowners can walk away from an agreement, but the community tends to have less of that. And because of that, it's actually slowing down a lot of our projects. So while we do think that it is nice to have, CBPs codified in to requirements, even with the loss of those, with the changes from the Department of Energy, there is still some leverage that the communities have because pushback can be so costly and it can slow down the project. And it also makes a lot of landowners jump ship. So I have farmers who are looking at very large scale solar projects, and they say they can't talk to anybody at they don't smile at people at the grocery store, they told me, anymore, because the community has really turned on them, they felt like. And so a community benefit plan should be brought early and should be communicated to everybody so that they can feel as they're still part of the community, and that we have the best sites, the best landowners, the best farms that we can use, or not prime farmland if we can, all of those options. But when you reduce the size of the people who are willing to work with you because it's created such animosity in the community. It really is problematic. So we try to really encourage folks early and often and true engagement so that people feel like they have time to process what this could look like. There is a lot of pushback from the developers because they think that will give people time to organize against a project, which is understandable, but it would probably be better to create a project that people don't want to organize against. So encouraging them to really think very considerately about what is the best case scenario. So a lot of that is citing, a lot of that is incorporation of agriculture into the project. So agrivoltaics, considering viewscapes, really taking feedback from people in the area. Those are all really important pieces. We also find people are interested during the building up the agreement process, but then once the developer sells to a utility, a lot of that investment goes away. So a community benefit plan should also include the utility at the table so they have the same level of expectations, they have the same understanding of the agreements, and they can also get feedback from the community. So, for example, I have one farmer who said, I don't have any wind turbines on my land, but every time it rains, it just makes a really weird sound as though a turbine going around bounces off a hill just in the rain. And we've had speakers come up from Nebraska who say it would be ideal to have someone in the community that farmer could call and notify, and then they can just turn off that turbine for that period of time, right? There are opportunities, and a community benefit plan could build in that communication structure for the lifespan of the project and awareness. The landowner, when he called the utility, they offered him $500, and he did not feel like that was that was not true engagement. That didn't seem respectful of the costs that he felt like he was incurring. And so really a community benefit plan should save money in the long run because it should develop this relationship of trust. It kind of greases the rails because there can be a lot of friction in this process. And so when folks come together for a true partnership with respect for the community and trying to listen to priorities, it doesn't mean they have to accept everything, but at least showing some effort to listen and some effort to mitigate rather than just throwing a couple $100 or a couple $1,000 at something, it can really encourage the community to get behind a project. And I think that's just, it's worth so much for the farmers. I would also say that beyond just the social connection, there's the rural vitality piece. Many farmers, no farmer wants to see their rural communities hollowed out any further than they already are. And so by providing an idea that this project is not just going to turn their little town into an industrial park that just provides energy elsewhere, that it will actually support their main street and support their schools. Again, it can stop all of the signs that get put out and the yelling that can happen at town hall meetings and really make it a project people are excited about.
I think so much of what you both have said is so important to this entire community benefits discussion. And I think particularly what I'm fixating on right now is how important it is for, excuse me, for developers to be actively reaching out to community members, farm organizations, labor, other community groups as early as possible. And really ideally turning over some of the design of the engagement process to them. You know, we've all been to plenty of permitting meetings. You know, I would expect many attendees of this call have been to them where, you know, we have the polished presentation and okay, we've checked the box, that's community engagement. You know, I think it is so important to be actively working with community groups as early as possible. You know, in our work in Minnesota, when we've done colleagues of mine in the past have done work around transmission siting. You know, a lot of land agents for these projects it never occurs to them that they, you know, should be in touch with, you know, community members in a way that many rural residents expect them to. So, you know, again, having relationships with community groups who have relationships who can help explain, you know, and educate folks around what these developers are saying, whether it's good or whether it's bad. is really important because people trust who they have relationships with, and some land agent in a suit coming to your town and trying to strong arm you into signing a siting contract without further discussion or engagement is part of the reason why I think we're running into all of these opposition problems around renewable siting. So I want to dig in a little bit more on that. So Vonda, in your experience, how can project developers connect with unions or labor organizations to involve them in this kind of stakeholder process?
Well, so unions are getting better in areas of going to industrial development board meetings and planning and zoning meetings. But to be honest, direct contact with both building trades and the central labor councils in the area is a great first step. Unions operate on a continuum. We are not monolithic. And so, the things that some of our public sector unions might want to see in a development might be different from what the firefighters want or what the building trades want. In a city that's growing as fast as Nashville is, affordable housing is becoming more and more of a critical issue. That as a part of these developments, that often there are TIF monies that are associated with them and other economic incentives. Those tax dollars should also make sure that those projects meet the needs of the community and are not just developments that make money for folks that already have money.
Tara, so how can developers do a better job of engaging with farmers, since we know this is a particularly big conversation across the country with renewable siting right now?
I mean, one thing that we all dream would happen, and I don't know how realistic it is, but if we're able to communicate with farmers as they were looking for land to lease as a group. We have a lot of farmers who, before they sign any contracts, they'll actually call their neighbors and they'll negotiate a rate first. It would be nice if the developers would follow that process instead of making the farmers self-organize, because it leads to a level of distrust. A lot of times the first document that they come with is actually a non-disclosure agreement telling them that they can't say anything to anybody else. And so that is a hard way to engage with a farmer, right? Who they'll have generational relationships with the top 5 farms around them, most commonly, and a lot of trading of equipment. It is a bad vibe, and so a lot of times farmers who do end up signing those, they feel very constipated in their ability to share. They don't feel like they can promote the project, and so the people who would be the best advocates for the project are now completely hamstrung in their ability to talk about the benefits. And because they are seen as getting something that the rest of the community isn't getting, anything they do say is too little, too late, and received as biased. So when interacting with farmers, I would recommend trying to get a group of them together so you can talk to your local farmers union chapter. We've got chapters in lots of different states. You can talk to Farm Bureau, which is also an opportunity to talk to more conventional farmers. And you can call your agronomists and your local co-ops. So getting in touch with farmers can be really challenging, but depending on the community you're in, it does take, just like Vonda said, going on the ground and finding out what's actually there. There will be different groups that have different levels of availability and commitment to engage with the idea. There are not a lot of farm groups in our state who have a strong understanding of renewable energy, because we're at the beginning of this process. So that's why we're trying to build our musculature on this right now. I would also say, when you are trying to interact with farmers, it is really important to remember the farming cycle. Most of our jobs aren't working on a seasonal basis for how much work we have. So you will be laughed off the farm if you try to bring legal documents in mid-May to a farmer who has to get 2,000 acres planted, right? Like if you try October or mid-November, like don't do that. Don't try to set up your hearing meetings, or I mean, we have had a lot before. We try to host public meetings at times when it's just not realistic for farmers to be there to ask questions or represent themselves. And that's a really hard thing. So when you're trying to engage, think about those very practical, pragmatic factors that most of people who work in offices don't necessarily have to deal with. I would also say it is important to remember that the farmers do have pretty prescient experience on the land. So they might be able to say, yeah, that's really close to the transmission, but you don't know how wet that field is, or that slope, the aerial map of that is not representative of that slope. And so being able to take their considerations, like I said, engagement should be bi-directional, and allowing them to provide some of those factors in and understanding of that would be really key. I would also say that when you're working with farmers, it would be really, again, hard to do. We haven't seen a great model, but understanding that how the land rent that the utility is paying is going to impact the lease structure of all of the farms around them renting land. So we have already, just like Vonda said, housing access, we have farmland access issues where it is extremely difficult for farmers to get affordable land and can start farming. It's a very high bar to get the infrastructure you need to start farming. And so if that is something that the utility should be aware of, that there's a local market to the area that they're trying to go in, of how that affects how much people are paying for rent, what everyone's feelings are. And if they want to have a plan for farmland access or a fund for beginning farmers to be able to access land that might be taken out of their local pool, or a way, like I said, to implement agrivoltaics or something in that to allow farmers to still try to make a living at farming, which is hard enough. And I would also say, sorry, I'm talking a lot, but like I said, you have to respect the timeline of the year for how much farmers have, but also give them time to think things. So anything given with a tight deadline, or like, I need a decision by then, or can't you guys come in 2 days, that will not be received well. So we do a lot of education where we drop the information for people to kind of percolate on and consider, and then give them as much context as they want, but give them plenty of time before the actual ask for a decision is made, so that they can talk through the generations of their family that will have considerations on the farmland, through their neighbors who will also be affected. All of those, you really need to give them time to think about what they're doing and how that can look. Vonda, you said it's like meetings and meetings and meetings when you're doing community engagement. Like, I think that needs to be really built into the structure of this, because you just can't expect people to know how they feel about a change this big on their projects.
Absolutely. Two things you just said, Tara, particularly resonating with me. One is just that I had a friend tell me, it's planting season. They're on the farm. They just got contacted by a renewable land agent. So great timing on there.
So Erik, I've got a follow-up question here from Zach, who's asking, this is for Tara. What would some community benefits for renewable energy be considered, for farmers?
I mean, there's the standard ones of emergency medical services, emergency management plans, paying into, your fire and ambulance. All of our rural communities really struggle with ambulance services and fire and EMS services. So that's a huge benefit to farmers. Road access and construction would be huge. A community benefit plan should really take into account soil management as well. That would be very key. Like I said, farmland access. So if there's any way that a community benefit plan could acknowledge the outsized impact that it is having on the availability of farmland to the area, to provide access for beginning farmers or farmers who are working in diversified commodities or something different. That would be a huge reframe for folks. But it's still people issues, right? It's childcare, it's school. These rural school districts really struggle as well. And in our joint revenue agreements through the state of Wisconsin, the in lieu tax payment that utilities pay actually doesn't affect school districts. So we have developers kind of routinely say that they'll make the schools whole by saying that what you're losing in tax revenue, we will provide back. I would say a community benefit plan or good, being a good neighbor would not be, we won't make it worse. You should try to make it better by being in the community. So instead of expecting that minimum tax payment, you should try to assume that you're going to be a member of the community and you should try to add to it. But key things would be management for emergency services. There's also concern of if something breaks and it flies into an adjacent field, have actual plans for how that cleanup goes. I don't know what you do if there's a hailstorm and windstorm and you have fiberglass ending up through a hayfield. There has to be a plan for what that looks like. And you can do that through ordinances, but a community benefit plan would have a little more robust structure for how that could be improved upon. I hope that answers the question.
I just want to add on to what Tara said here. I mean, farmers are part of rural communities and their interests are likely the same as union members in that community, particularly around housing, childcare, and healthcare broadly. There's so many opportunities for communities, farmers, workers to solve these long-standing problems in rural communities if they're getting a really robust community benefit agreement out of a project. As many rural residents on this call will know, your township, your city, your county has a list a mile long of projects that they could use investment in and services that they'd like to expand. So I think that's really important for that Tara raised that, and actually feeds very well into my final structured question here, which is really around how we can build coalitions between groups with maybe differing interests, differing opinions, and ensure that we're solving kind of our collective interests through community benefits, engagement, and agreements. Vonda, could you tell us a little bit more about what that coalition work was like in your experience?
Sure. So the work that around the soccer stadium happened in 2017, 2018. But we have investment, the largest Ford electric vehicle plant is now being built in West Tennessee, which impacts all of the conversations and really interest groups that Tara has talked about. We have farmers that are trying to figure out how to, if they sell land, where are areas that they can replace land. There are the environmental concerns around all the power that has been used with these huge developments. And so with the experience of the community benefits agreement with the soccer stadium, we have started a statewide coalition because in every area of our state, there are investments that have community benefit plans on them as a result of the investments. We're trying to figure out how that will work, but making sure that the neighbors are organized and ready for the conversations around the impacts to their community. So we've been holding small meetings, organizing around different topics. We had a wetlands bill in our state legislature that gave us an opportunity to organize folks to have an understanding of how degrading our wetlands can impact our whole ecosystem. We already have flooding and infrastructure challenges. And so if we're just allowing developers to go in with no regulation, and so we're bringing community together around issues that are related to the development, and the interest groups grow based on the stage they are in the process. Ideally, companies would come and really genuinely engage with these communities as they go in them. However, we know that that is rarely the case. And so it is up to folks that are interested in seeing things done well in terms of development, to organize our neighbors to make sure that they are making the best of these projects.
Tara, how about in your experience working in different coalitions around this? What have been, in your experience, what have been kind of success points, friction points? How can we all find more common ground to build a coalition and advance our community interest around community benefits?
I have a dog barking in the background. I hope you can't hear it too much. Okay. I would say it's really important to think about the main stakeholders, and you have to have someone local who's really doing it. Like Vonda said, it's hard to get, but you really need to have these community benefits come from the community. And without that, it's not real, it's not going to succeed, and it's not going to be trusted by the people who are really affected. So that's the key, I think. Every community is also going to be different, right? So you can't be like, we got to talk to the chamber, we got to talk to the local 4-H chapter, and it's just, you have to be there. And we use the snowball method a lot. So we talk to 1 or 2 leaders and we ask them, who else in the community is going to be there? Who's going to show up? And that's a really key point of engaging early and often gives enough time for those stakeholders to get built up, right? Because you don't want people feeling like, oh, I missed the boat, I don't know. You need to have time to get a full picture of what the community looks like. So I would say that's really key. It's not very satisfying, but I mean, you can look at local leaders, and in our rural areas, you can call the school district superintendent and you can learn something from them about who else you should talk to. You can call the local drugstore, and he's probably the president of the Chamber of Commerce, and he can connect you to the other key players. Our town boards are small, but they matter. So there are opportunities there. But it's really, you just have to show up and have real conversations.
Yep, absolutely. And I think really giving the community's ownership over the process from the get-go. I mean, it helps that people actually, or each process actually reach people in the way that, because they're neighbors, because they're friends, they actually know, in this community, no one or people have poor internet access, so don't even bother trying to do digital communications. And in this community, people still have their local newspaper, so focus your communications on that. It's really taking advantage of those local relationships and the local knowledge, and engaging them early and giving them actual ownership in how this process is planned and executed. That really makes it, gets the entire effort going on a really strong footing. All right.
If I could add one more thing, I had forgot to say, it's also, don't assume you got everybody, right? Like if you're missing labor, don't be like, oh, there's just no labor here. There are unrepresented factors that I think you can add in if you, again, have the time and take the time to do it.
Absolutely. All right, we got a bunch of questions in the chat here, and Tom, you're calling those questions out, right?
I sure am.
All right.
Zach asked another question about what states or regions in the U.S. have the most prevalence of publicly deliberated community benefits plans for renewable energy. And it made me think a little bit about, or want to know a little bit more about, are these community benefits plans regulated? How are they regulated? Who is following through? Or, who is there any sort of an agency that is making sure that the companies are following through on their promises? And is there some sort of tracking mechanism, to get to Zach's question about, how do we find out where those community benefits plans or agreements may be in place? And that would then allow us to find out, hey, is there one in my community that may or may not be being followed through with, that I could take some action, or others in my community could band together to take some action to put pressure to make those things actually come to fruition?
I can start on this one. On that NDA topic around land acquisition that Tara raised earlier, there's a similar problem around many community benefits efforts. There are a few publicly available databases of community benefit plans and community benefit agreements that are public. But many agreements are under NDA between community groups or whatever stakeholder group is signing and the developer. So the entire NDA conversation is not just limited to the negotiation of land acquisition here. It's really making it more difficult for community to community to look at other examples and be in a stronger position to negotiate a community benefit plan. So it is a big, I think it is a challenge for all of us. But I'll link one of the better databases for at least renewables community benefits in the chat here. I turn it over to Vonda and Tara if you got anything else to add there.
I'll go first. Vonda will have more. Go ahead, Vonda.
So my response will be brief. So the National AFL-CIO through our legislative department is monitoring those community benefits agreements that are in places where the labor councils or state federations have been a part of those agreements. When we were working on ours, we worked with an organization called Partnership for Working Families, which is out of California. They've now changed the name to Power Switch Action. But there are, I would say, 5 or 6 organizations that have really leaned into building the nuts and bolts of community benefits agreements and making sure that they are enforceable and are legally binding. The challenge comes with periodic reporting around the status of the benchmarks that you have set as a part of the agreement, so that you know where you are and where you want to get to. It's in Tennessee now, our legislature just passed this session. If you receive economic development dollars, then you cannot enter into community benefits agreements. Now, I think they're full of, I don't know who's on this call, but I do think that an awareness around the value that community benefits can bring and the power that it can bring to communities is really kind of getting around with the chamber types. So I do think that it is important that you go to the chamber first to begin those conversations around, like, we are interested in this development. We just want to make sure that development aligns with and meets the needs of folks in our area that will be impacted by it. But there are all kinds of sources I see in the chat that Erik has put, a good one. So I'll leave it there.
And just to
add.
I was just saying, just to follow up real quick on Vonda mentioned Power Switch Action. And if you scroll up, I think you mentioned power switch action, right? That you work
I
with, yeah.
did.
So if you scroll up to the 1:43 p.m. mark, I posted a link to a how-to guide that we've published on Shareable that was written by Power Switch Action about setting up community benefits agreements. Sorry, Tara, you wanted to jump in?
Oh, I was just going to say it is important to find a legal entity, right, that can create something that's legally enforceable and will also be around long enough to enforce the agreement. A lot of people want to spend a lot of time talking about what it should look like, but the actual life of the document, right, needs to happen. So we are a little wary of people who want to have a local 501c3 that has a limited membership and not an established presence, or is small enough that if the board were to dissolve, we don't know what would happen. So you want to make sure that if you are creating a partner that's going to be the representative entity, that there is some plan for how that's going to continue to exist for the lifespan of the project.
There was just one other question that was, Erik, you kind of touched on a little bit earlier already, but it was about the communications channels, how these messages around community benefits, agreements and engagement, real engagement is happening with residents that, may be older, may not be as tech savvy. Is there a way that this is happening now? And if anyone on the panel does not feel like it's the most effective way that it could be happening, are there any suggestions for ways to improve that communication with community members?
I can keep going on this, but I'll defer to the both of you if you want to jump in first.
I will say that we kind of drew a map, and we actually door knocked, had canvassers out in neighborhoods talking about the development. We had community meetings around it. We had multiple at different times of the day. I think that often the reason that communities are unaware of what's happening is because they're working. And so we have to make information accessible, and that means putting it out in as many different ways as we possibly can. We went to churches on Sunday passing out information. We went to community centers. We went to the places where we know people hang out, even the local watering hole. I always volunteer for that assignment. But I mean, all of those things are important. And so that was a part of our outreach plan.
Yeah, I was going to say it's all of the above. I mean, some communities have really active community Facebook pages, and you can do outreach on there to get the word out about meetings, or, put surveys and forms up that can actually get responses. Others, you'll get crickets from doing it that way. Door knockers showing up at town board meetings. When big projects are coming, there's people at those town board meetings who, like I said, have big feelings. So we've done presentations at those to give them the idea of community benefit plans. And again, you need a long timeline there to let the community percolate through what that could mean. Local newspapers, billboards, even. We had complaints from some community members of, well, why aren't there billboards for this project? If it was good, there'd be billboards. So we have to consider on all the outreach venues in order to get people aware of it. And of course, we'll still miss people. No matter if we did everything, we still would miss some.
Great. Well, I'm going to cut off Erik and not let him answer this question any further, because I do want to get to one last question. We're almost at time here. And Bree Nisley, who's presented in this series already, posted this question, and this is a great way to tie it all together. How can the electric cooperatives be a more accountable community partner, maybe compared to other developers in their community benefit plan developments?
It's a really important question. I think electric cooperatives already are trusted institutions in many rural communities. We hear it all the time from every cooperative, every trade association about how high customer satisfaction is. Despite any criticisms we may have, they are trusted institutions in any community. And I think what community benefit plans give every cooperative an opportunity to do is really continue to re-engage members, build trust, and get them involved not just in a community benefit plan process and around thinking about how projects that are benefiting the electric cooperative can further benefit the community to a greater extent, but it's also about getting them re-involved in cooperative democracy, getting them involved in the cooperative decision making. So I think this is such a huge opportunity for co-op member owners and for cooperatives, leaders and staff to really think a lot about how we can really make the most of this opportunity around community benefits.
Nailed it. No notes.
Yeah. And, I just realized I missed a question from Nicholas asking, how can we as community members or local organizations encourage developers to engage in robust community benefits plans? What are some of the earliest markers, public notices or hearings, et cetera, of a new energy project development that we should be monitoring? It seems like community benefits plans are a great way for them to reduce friction or backlash, let so few are actually doing it.
So we had someone, a researcher actually, that is a part of our ecosystem that worked with Jobs with Justice, that monitored like the local investments in our area. So then we kind of follow the investment. I think that the I mentioned them before, the IDB, the industrial development boards in areas, is kind of the first marker, because when they start buying up land and that kind of thing, that something's coming. So, and zoning, we monitor zoning in our area to try to figure out where we should be going next.
You can, for renewable energy projects, you can also do a best guess. So if there's a coal plant that's older and going to be decommissioned in the next few years, if there's high transmission capacity, they often want to update transmission lines before they want to add the power purchase agreement in. So you can be aware of, if you have a coal plant or a system within 50 miles or so, you can guess that that's going to be. We happen to be adjacent to Minnesota that has a higher standard. So we know that some companies would rather produce energy here in Wisconsin to send over to Minnesota. So we have an idea of where some projects will be just based on hubs that would be easier to access. So just having an understanding of that, we are already trying to just map out areas that we think that this will be a hot topic in soon, and then start the conversation before all those lease agreements get signed, so that the farmers and landowners and the rest of the community already have some foundational context, so that the first reaction isn't just fear and upsettedness and no as a response, but okay, if we wanted to do this, how would we get it right, would be a better way. So that's just keeping an eye on transmission and what the grid currently looks like to see what will shape it in the future.
All right, I think we're about ready to wrap. Just want to give, if there's any final thoughts that anybody would like to share.
Just want to thank both Tara and Vonda for joining us today. Really great to have their perspectives on this call. So very appreciative of them spending some time with the Rural Power Coalition today. So thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, yeah, again, thank you all for contributing to this session and to the Rural Power Coalition's Rural Electric Cooperative Co-lab. Again, as we mentioned at the beginning, this is the 8th and final session of this series as we know it. We may have some bonus sessions coming out as we go deeper into the summer when we get there. So stay tuned for that. We will be producing a new Rural Electric Cooperative organizing toolkit, which will be based heavily on all the presentations from the last 8 sessions. Look for that coming out later in the summer. We will make sure that everybody who's registered for these sessions gets emailed when it's available. So just keep an eye out for that. Also, as always, as I mentioned, this session is being recorded. We'll be releasing the transcript, the video, and the slides most likely early next week, and that will be posted to Canvas. There's a link to the Canvas in the chat if you haven't registered for that yet. And we also have a brief survey, which is really helpful. Any feedback you have will help us design the future sessions that we produce after now the collab has been completed. So really, we review all the feedback we get, and we deeply appreciate it. And with that, I just want to say again, thank you everyone who's come to join us for this session or the series as a whole, and we will see you next time.